In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, found a little island, and knew exactly what to do. Cuba. He claimed it for the Spanish throne, and they ruled there. It was a colony for literally hundreds of years. There was the Spanish-American War in the late 1800s that resulted in Cuba being wrenched away from the Spanish, and the United States, after a few years, gave kind of a nominal level of freedom. Batista was the last leader before the Communist Revolution. He became basically a dictator, even though originally, if my memory is correct, he was elected. It had a pretty thriving upper class. The cigar families, the heritage there is something that they're very proud of. There was a bloody revolution when Fidel took over. A lot of people fled the country. Once it was clear that Batista was fleeing, then a lot of people fled the country because they thought we could be left behind to be killed. And a lot of people were killed. A lot of people got out. Many of them went to Miami, and a part of Miami became known as Little Havana. There was a strong Catholic presence there, a small evangelical presence, and freedom of religion has suffered greatly under the Castro regimes, Fidel and now his brother, Raul. So I want to come at this from several different angles. You've clearly heard the news by now. And I don't know what TV shows you watch. I don't know what radio shows you listen to, if any. I don't know what commentators you're hearing or reading. But I would like to come at this from several different angles. There are people right now who are berating President Obama for normalizing relations with Cuba. Many of them are Hispanic Americans, Cuban Americans, who feel that this was a betrayal. And there are a lot of conservatives that are just berating him. I've been listening to some of their talk shows. One of the points that they're making, which is a valid one, is that Obama has not had the backbone to stand up to any oppressive tyrant since he has taken office. I think that that's a fairly fair, wide brush to paint Obama with. That if you're an enemy of America and you want to saber rattle, whether you're Syria, whether you're Russia dealing with Ukraine, whether you are the Saudi family who is oppressing millions of its own people, whether you're ISIS taking the ground that Americans fought so hard for in Iraq, this is not a president who has backbone. And so the critics are saying that this is yet another display of his cowardice, of his treachery. And I agree with it in part, but I disagree in part. So let me explain how I disagree. No, I'll start with how I agree. President Obama chooses his rhetoric so poorly, you often wonder if he is sympathetic with the bad guys. After one of the recent terrorist attacks in America, Obama, in his speech, became an apologist for the Muslims, became an apologist for Islam, again giving us the lying mantra that Islam is a peaceful religion. Mr. Obama, that's not your job as the president. Your job is to be the commander-in-chief, to say that we will hunt these people down and we will kill them. That's your job. Not to be an apologist for the enemy, not to talk, as he does, about decades of grievance. I mean, even the way he's dealing with the police, the police tension that's going on right now because of the two men, one in Ferguson and one in New York City, the African-American men who died at the hands of police. The way he's dealing with that is like a spoiled kid who went to a school and was taught false history. It's just warped. And he's warped in his dealings with other nations. I mean, when's the last time you heard President Obama decry human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, in any of our Middle Eastern so-called allies, say Egypt, Pakistan. When's the last time you heard it? You don't hear it. So he says we're going to normalize relations with Cuba, but he never tips his hand, or rather tips his hat, never gives an honorable mention of the people that were murdered by the communists when the communists took over. He doesn't talk about the threat that Cuba was when they were a close satellite, an ally of Russia, and the Russians were building a missile base there to attack America 90 miles off our shore. In other words, he could have been like Ronald Reagan. Reagan said that the Soviet Union was the evil empire. Reagan said that, tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev. And people on Reagan's staff wanted to take those lines out. They didn't want him being controversial. Reagan wanted to be controversial. He wanted to stand for liberty. He wanted to stand against tyranny. He wanted to defend the innocent that were suffering under the heel of tyrants and oppression. Obama doesn't want to do that. And so in that light, I concur with the critics who are giving Obama a failing grade on this one. When we come back, I'll tell you where I think that the critics are getting it terribly wrong.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.